Hey everyone, DQDC here. I am back here in my data pack showcase world, and this week I'm going to be showing off not a data pack, but just a boring old resource pack. This is a resource pack I've put together to mitigate a bug that I ran into when I was working on this aviator helmet data pack that will be coming out soon. And this bug has been in the game for over 6 years. It was first reported in November of 2019, and it has bug tracker ID 166101. For reference, we're up to the 300,000s now for bug IDs, so that means this bug has been in the game longer than nearly half of the bugs that have ever been reported. This bug causes the enchantment glint effect to get stronger on item textures that have more layers to them. On the left here, I have just a plain netherite chest plate. That texture only has one layer to it. Here is a dyed leather chest plate, which has 2 layers to the texture. And here is a dyed and trimmed leather chest plate that has 3 layers to the texture. If I add an enchantment to all of these, you can see from left to right, the enchantment glint gets much stronger. This is even more pronounced if I set the time to night. And the cause of this is simply that the enchantment glint gets applied 3 times on this item, 2 times on this one, and only 1 on this item. Notably, this does not impact the appearance of armor while it's being worn, it just impacts the appearance of the item itself. To combat this, I've put together a resource pack, which I will enable now. And now that the resource pack is enabled, you can see the enchantment glint strength is the same across all 3 items. That is pretty much it for the actual extent of what this resource pack does. But if you want to stick around for a technical explanation, I'll hop over to VS Code to take a look at the files required to do this. I am over here in VS Code with a slightly stripped down version of the resource pack. And there are 2 main files at the core that make this resource pack work. The first is this generated.json file, and this is identical to the vanilla version of this file, other than I've added this textures field. This is the item model that every item in the game eventually points to in its render chain, and I've just made it so that every item now has a layer 1 and a layer 2 texture in their model, and those models will be identical to whatever the previous layer in the model was. This means that every item in the game will now have 3 levels of enchantment glint applied. And so to keep them from being too bright, I've also modified the core shader for the glint effect, and I've added this little multiplier here to decrease the strength of the enchantment glint effect. You may think that setting it to 1/3 would be the best solution for having 3 layers, but just the way the math works with stacking multiple copies of a transparent texture, setting it to about 2/3 made things work a bit better. Like I said, this is a slightly stripped back version of the resource pack, and that's because this solution here introduced a little bug along the way on its attempt to fix the bug that this resource pack addresses. And that has to do with items with semi-transparent textures. Because I am now stacking 3 copies of the same texture, any pixel that is semi-transparent will now be darker and more opaque than it was before. Fortunately, this seems to have only impacted stained glass panes. To address this bug, I have also overwritten the vanilla item model for all of the stained glass panes. And all I've done in all of these item models is just set layer 1 and layer 2 to be an empty texture. You may be wondering at this point why I didn't just set every item to have an empty texture in layers 1 and layers 2, and that has to do with texture baking. I'm not entirely sure what texture baking does, other than presumably make rendering textures faster down the line. But if I set the layer 1 and layer 2 to be a set texture, I would run into issues with warnings when I loaded the resource pack, because it was trying to draw textures from both the block atlas and the item atlas for some items. So if I wanted to use an empty texture, I'd have to have a separate empty block texture and an empty item texture. and go through on every item in the game and tell it which one to use, which is why I originally switched to this solution of just using the previous layers in the first place. As far as I can tell, these are the only items impacted, because all of the vanilla items are made up of entirely opaque or entirely transparent pixels. So the only textures with semi-transparent pixels are block textures, and every other block in the game uses the block model renderer even when it appears as an item. So it is just these stained glass panes, which use a block texture but are rendered as an item, that have this issue. One final change you'll see in the final resource pack is that there's a bunch of these different folders in the root directory, and these are all just resource pack overlays. If we look at our pack McMeta file, you'll notice that there's a bunch of these overlay entries, and what these do is they look at what pack format we're using, and depending on which pack format we currently have, which is just based on what version of the game we're running, we'll load a different one of these directories. And the only thing in these directories is the core shader override. The file name and how the file is laid out has changed a bit over time, and so these are all just different versions of that same file with the same little multiplier added. So this just makes it so that the resource pack works across lots of versions. As it's set up, it works from Minecraft 1.17 all the way through Minecraft 1.21.11 with the same exact resource pack zip file. Well, that is it for this episode. Thank you for watching and sticking through that technical explanation. If you're interested in seeing the aviator helmets and the enchanted elytra that those exist to support, I hope you'd consider subscribing to see those episodes when they come out. But otherwise, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you all in the future.